This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website. More about them at the end of the video. Innistrad Remastered is, without a doubt, the best set Wizards of the Coast has released this entire year. No, wait, is that true? I actually think it's the worst set Wizards of the Coast has released so far this year. Oh wait, it's the only set that's been released so far this year. Well, whether it is the best or the worst may be up for some debate. But either way, Innistrad Remastered features 290 classic cards set on Innistrad, tons of new alternate art frames from borderless to retro to unreadable movie posters, and of course, a complete set of commander decks headlined by fan favorite Innistrad legends. Wait, what's that you say? That last part isn't true? There are no Innistrad Remastered precons designed by Wizards of the Coast? Honestly, I get it. Innistrad Remastered is a reprint-only set, so making Commander precons for it would be tricky to say the least. I mean, would those precons be reprint-only or have some new card designs? Personally, what I'd have done is taken both classic, popular commanders from Innistrad's past, as well as legendary commanders that maybe flew under a lot of players' radars, and then just design new, up-to-date commander precons for them. What's that? You're saying that's exactly what I did. Presented here are the lost Innistrad Remastered precons designed by Tolarian Community College to simulate what you might have gotten had Wizards of the Coast made remastered precons for this set. This video is about those commander decks because many Magic the Gathering players asked the question, is it worth it to buy an Innistrad Remastered commander deck? In this video, I'll talk through precons that I designed for Toren's Fist of Angels, the Gitrog Monster, and Grin Corpseborn. These are not deck techs, they're more deck overviews, highlighting key cards and important synergies, as well as discussing the overall deck strategy. Each of these decks can be built for about $100, and I have included complete deck lists in this video's description. However, my main focus for this video will be talking about what each deck wants to do, and highlighting those key cards, synergies, and strategies that best demonstrate what the deck can do. So who's up first in our trio of terror? Well, Toren's Fist of the Angels is a highly explosive go-wide deck in Selesnya colors. Toren's is a 3-mana 2/2 green-white human cleric legend with the keyword training, which means whenever Toren's attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. He has a triggered ability too. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 green and white human soldier creature token with training. I feel Toren's is a highly underrated commander. And I think one of the reasons he's so underrated is that he was first printed in a very unpopular set, Crimson Vow. You know, the horror set whose theme was getting married? Nothing scarier than that, am I right, fellas? It also doesn't help that Toren's has a very unpopular and needlessly confusing keyword, training. Training is essentially the reverse of the mentor mechanic, a much more successful implementation of growing a creature when it attacks with a greater powered creature. Once you understand what training does, the mechanic is actually quite strong, especially if you build around it, which, believe it or not, I've done in this precon. The goal of this deck is simple. Cast creatures which trigger Torens, which puts more creatures into play. There are myriad ways to pump the creatures you have in play, from anthems like Intangible Virtue, Flowering of the White Tree, and King Darien to creatures that add +1/+1 counters to your board, such as Cathar's Crusade, Mikaeus the Lunarch, and Sovereign Okinek Ahu. There are also lots of ways to pay you off for having a deck full of creatures. Beast Whisperer draws you a card whenever you cast a creature spell. Enduring Innocence and Rumor Gatherer draw you cards when creatures enter play. And one-off card draw spells like Shamanic Revelation and Inspiring Call draw you a bunch of cards if you have a wide board of big creatures. Speaking of Rumor Gatherer, Alliance is a strong mechanic in this deck, because you essentially double your creature enter the battlefield effects thanks to Toren's creating an extra creature creature whenever you cast a spell. Rumor Gatherer immediately draws you a card the first time a creature you cast in a turn resolves, while Venom Connoisseur will consistently give your team Death Touch every single turn as long as you have at least one creature to cast. Forgotten Ancient and Luminarch Aspirant help you spread +1/+1 counters around your creatures. You'll want to be strategic with where you put these counters to make the best use out of your training creatures. Generally, you want one of your creatures to have more power than the rest, because a single high power creature will boost every lower power training creature that attacks with it all at once. Because you'll be putting a lot of +1/+1 counters on your creatures, Abzan Falconer, Envoy of the Ancestors, and Inspiring Paladin all boost your creatures with +1/+1 counters with additional keywords. Between these three creatures and Venom Connoisseur, your Toren's deck will be an absolute nightmare to deal with in combat. As for mana ramp, there's not a ton in this deck. Most of the ramp I did include comes in the form of 1-mana dorks like Birds of Paradise, Avacyn's Pilgrim, and the various green mana elves. That's because these curve nicely into Toren's, while also triggering his ability when cast. After turn 1, you're generally much better off casting more impactful spells than ramping to large spells, since the majority of your deck is pretty low curve. Board wipes are a real concern for this go-wide deck. Selfless Spirit and Unbreakable Formation can help defend against traditional Wrath of Gods, while Guardian of Faith is a fantastic card to hold up in the mid to late game to protect you from all forms of Wrath of God effects. There are also a lot of ways to rebuild in the deck. Sun Titan, a staple of any white precon, is fantastic here as a means of building your board back to its former glory. Evolution Witness positively pops off in this deck with all the different ways you have to add counters to it. Overall, this is a very powerful and aggressive precon, capable of hitting your opponents hard and fast, just the way I like it. No one creature you'll have in play will be that important, which will make your opponent's spot removal much less effective than it otherwise would be. So if you're a fan of aggro strategies and underappreciated commanders, our Toren's deck is for you. Next up, we have a fan favorite, now a little more accessible thanks to its reprinting in Innistrad Remastered, the Gitrog Monster. Gitrog Monster is a lands and graveyards-based synergy deck designed to mitigate the downside of the Frog Horror and juice every last drop of its upside. Frog juice. The Gitrog Monster, for those of you who have never encountered it before, is a 5-mana 6/6 Golgari Frog Horror legend. It's got Death Touch. It's got Sacrifice a land at the beginning of your upkeep, or sacrifice your frog. It's got you may play an additional land on each of your turns. But most importantly, it's got whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. That last ability is what we're getting the most out of with this precon. We're going to put as many lands into play as we can and sacrifice them to draw more cards. This deck churns through cards at an unbelievable rate. The rate is so high, in fact, that I've included a copy of Elixir of Immortality to ensure you never deck out. There's also a Gaia's Blessing hidden in the deck to shuffle your graveyard into your library whenever you mill it over. Many of the most powerful lands payoffs are outside of this precon's price range, but even working within our $100 budget, there are a lot of classics in the deck. Extra land drop effects are a must, since of course they stack with Gitrog Monster's own extra land drop ability. Loot Exuberant Explorer is the most recent addition to this roster, but we've also got the case of the Locked Hothouse, Wayward Swordtooth, Druid Class, and Dryad of the Elysian Grove. We've also got a few Crucible of Worlds variants, including Ramunap Excavator and Perennial Behemoth, which are great with the many Sacrifice a Land effects included in the deck. Speaking of sacrificing a land, Zurin Orb is the best in the business at doing exactly that. I've also included Sylvan Safekeeper to double up on on-demand land sacrifices, and Titania, Protector of Argoth, for some additional land sack payoffs. Gitrog Monster draws you cards if lands hit the graveyard from anywhere, so the deck includes several ways to bin your lands from your hand or your deck. Worm Harvest is a great way to turn lands in hand into worms on the battlefield at the cost of 5 mana. Scourge Familiar can turn lands in your hand into black mana, while Ayula's Influence turns them into 2/2 bears. You can also enchant a creature with Oblivion Crown to give that creature +1/+1 by discarding cards. As for milling from your deck, well, a trio of dredge cards, in Dakmor Salvage, Golgari Grave Troll, and of course Life from the Loam have got you covered there. If you have a Dakmor Salvage in hand and a way to discard it at instant speed, such as via Scourge Familiar or Ayula's Influence, you'll be able to dredge your entire deck, returning Dakmor Salvage each time, making a ton of either black mana, bears, or if you have an Oblivion Crown, a huge boost in power and toughness for a turn. Just be mindful that you can't dredge if you have an empty library, so you'll need a way to shuffle your graveyard into your library if you don't want to deck out. Many of the best win conditions for a lands deck cost upwards of $30 each. Feel free to add any of these to the deck if you already have them or just have a lot of cash to spend, but in my deck I've gotten creative with how we're winning the game after acquiring all of this value. Iridescent Vine Lasher is a nice source of burn, especially if you cast it for its offspring cost. I've also included Psychosis Crawler to drain your opponent every time Gitrog Monster draws you those extra cards. And of course, you can always make a board full of tokens with Scoot Swarm, Rampaging Baloths, or Avenger of Zendikar. I really feel our Gitrog Monster Precon is a great deck for any player who's felt priced out of a good lands deck due to the high price tag of many staples of the archetype. And you know what? There's a reason the Gitrog Monster is such a classic. The card is a ton of fun to play with and is an extremely powerful commander. This precon is also just a great baseline that you can upgrade as time goes on. Our next Innistrad Remastered precon features another classic commander from the plane, Grin, Corpseborn, an incredibly powerful Dimir Voltron control hybrid deck, masquerading as a zombie Kindred aggro deck. Grin, Corpseborn is a 5-mana, 5/5 zombie warrior legend in Dimir colors. It enters tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. In order to untap it, you need to sacrifice another creature, at which point you'll also add a +1/+1 counter to Grin. Whenever you attack with Grin, you get to destroy target creature defending player controls and put a +1/+1 counter on Grin. Grin is a rare instance of a Voltron-y commander that's not in white or green. It's very easy to kill someone with commander damage using Grin, since you can easily pump it over and over again at instant speed with its untap ability, even if it's already untapped. You're just gonna need enough fodder to pull that off, and since Grin is already a zombie, it's already primed with a creature type that's among the best in the game at creating sacrifice fodder. The goal of this deck is therefore as follows. 1. Get Grin into play and protect it with counter magic and hexproof or regeneration granting effects, and then 2. Put a lot of zombies into play that can be sacrificed to Grin to get it into lethal commander damage range. And if you're feeling particularly nasty, 3. Give Grin unblockable and eliminate your opponents one at a time in consecutive turns. Virtually all the greatest hits for sacrifice fodder in a zombie deck are here, from token generators like Headless Rider and Endless Ranks of the Dead, to cards that let you replay zombies from your graveyard, like Zulashore Lich Lord and Gisa and Geralf, also reprinted in Innistrad Remastered conveniently enough. Speaking of both Gisa and Geralf, most iterations of these two iconic zombie lovers are present in the deck, from Gisa the Hellraiser and Ghoulcaller Gisa to Geralf the Fleshwright and Geralf Visionary Stitcher. If you want a real flashback deck tech, you can see my own Gisa and Geralf deck tech from a million years ago, and check out what commander decks looked like in the ancient era of Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon. Our Grin precon is of course running Gravecrawler, one of the most powerful cards in the deck's 99, as it's a way to repeatedly pump your Grin before you go to combat. If you play in a group that doesn't mind infinite combos, I've also included a pair of ways to go infinite with Gravecrawler. Pitiless Plunderer gives you a treasure token every time you sacrifice your Gravecrawler to Grin, and Rooftop Storm, reprinted in Innistrad Remastered, is a ridiculous card that gives all your zombies a casting cost of 0. If going infinite is not something you're interested in, then you might consider just cutting Gravecrawler from the deck, since Rooftop Storm is both way too useful for cheating on mana, and somehow only costs about $2. There are several powerful card draw effects in the deck, both in the form of draw on death cards like Undead Augur, Midnight Reaper, and Archghoul of Thraben, and kindred draw spells like Graveborn Muse, Distant Melody, and Kindred Discovery. You'll also get a lot of natural card advantage from all the ways the deck has to reuse cards in the graveyard. Dreadhorde Invasion gives you an extra card to sacrifice every turn, but make sure you do sacrifice the token before your next turn so that you can start fresh with a new amassed token. Making an existing token bigger is not very impactful in this deck. By the same token, make sure you sacrifice all your decayed zombies to Grin before you get to your end step if you have a Jadar Ghoulcaller of Nephalia in play. The hardest part of this deck is protecting Grin. A 5-mana must-kill threat is a serious liability, especially for a color pair that's not known for its mana ramp. Fortunately, the deck has blue in it, which means you get to run counter spells. Lazotep Plating and Dispel are particularly effective at protecting Grin, while Bone Knitter and Zombie Master can also regenerate your Grin on command, with the latter also granting it Swamp Walk. Sucks to be any other players running black at your table when this is in effect. And of course, you can just permanently make your Grin untargetable with Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, or Whisper Silk Cloak. Once your Grin is large enough, you'll need to help it cross the finish line. Hordewing Scab will give Grin flying, but you can also just make it fully unblockable with Whisper Silk Cloak, Key to the City, or Artful Dodge. As a deck that's at the intersection of Voltron, Control, and Kindred archetypes, there's a lot of access points for different kinds of players to enjoy piloting this Grin precon. Honestly, that is one of the coolest parts about these remastered sets, that they give you an opportunity to take a second look at older cards that you may have otherwise forgotten about. But those are just my picks for what would have made a great commander for Innistrad Remastered precons, and now I want to hear from you. Is there a legendary from Innistrad's history that you think would have been great? Let me know, and maybe you'll just make some chilling brews of your own for Innistrad Remastered. I'm not putting this jacket on for continuity purposes. No, it's just gotten chilly in here, brewing up these commander precons. You know, building these commander decks from scratch was a lot of fun, but building something like a website from scratch, that could be a huge pain. In fact, some of us, I'm not gonna name names, can't even do it. Lucky for us, we have somebody to help. It's sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the best way to create a brand new professional-looking website. It's just so easy. Choose from one of their many template designs crafted by Squarespace's world-class design team, and then customize the design however you'd like. These designs support all major content types, from pages to galleries to blogs to commerce to calendars and so much more. They're also created with both modern browsers and mobile devices in mind. Each design automatically includes a unique mobile version of the experience that matches the overall style of your device, so your website looks great regardless of the device your visitors are using. If you make video content, you can upload and organize your whole library to showcase your content on beautiful video pages. If you want to add a paywall, you can do that too. In fact, you can sell whatever you'd like with your Squarespace website, whether it's physical goods or digital content or services. Squarespace has all the tools that you need. And if you want to keep track of how your site is performing, Squarespace's website and seller analytics tools can help measure your end-to-end online performance as well. Get insights into the top sources of traffic, better understand your reach growth, track your sales metrics, and get a better sense of where you should focus new engagement, all fully integrated and clearly displayed. So what more do you need to know? Just go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Tolarian Community College to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this video.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, baseball legend. Is it fair to call you a legend?
Baseball lover. That lived his childhood dream. I made a couple All-Star games, won a couple World Series, played for 14 years.
And now you're gonna get to play Commander. We made your commander as you, using some of your baseball card art. Look at that.
I am gonna swing this 2-cow at you.
2-cow, 2 furious. It's about milk.
How much damage is that?
Oh, I think there's something very bad coming our way.
We're on the same team, trust me.
How do you
If she can shuffle it, you can shuffle it.
I am taking off my jacket because it's getting hot in here.
All right, let's do it.
My dreams have been crushed. I'm sweating.